The forgotten transmission. Juna adjusted the telescope's focus, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. The observatory was silent, save for the hum of the machines. It was her favorite time of night, when the world seemed to hold its breath, and the stars felt close enough to touch. She had been working on a routine scan of a distant galaxy, cataloging celestial bodies for a research paper, but something had caught her attention. A signal, faint but unmistakable. At first, she thought it was interference, maybe a satellite passing by or a glitch in the system. But as she listened, the pattern became clear. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a language. "What are you?" she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. Juna spent hours analyzing the signal, running it through every program she had. But it was no use. The data was encrypted, and whatever was hiding inside was beyond her expertise. She needed help. That's when she remembered Riven. Riven was a recluse, a genius engineer who had disappeared from the scientific community years ago. Rumors swirled about why he left. Some said he was fired. Others claimed he had a breakdown. But Juna had worked with him once, back when she was a student. He was brilliant, if a little eccentric. She found him living in a small cabin on the edge of town, surrounded by gadgets and half-finished projects. When she showed him the signal, his eyes lit up. This is something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just random noise. There's a pattern here, a message." Together, they worked through the night, decoding the signal piece by piece. As the sun rose, they finally cracked it. The message was brief, but chilling. "We are not the first. They are coming." Juna felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean? Who's coming? Riven didn't answer. Instead, he pulled up an old file on his computer. It was a scan of an ancient manuscript, written in a language Juna didn't recognize. "This is from the 15th century, he said. "It's a record of a strange light in the sky, followed by a series of crop circles. The people back then thought it was a sign from the gods. But look at this." He zoomed in on a section of the manuscript. The symbols matched the pattern of the signal. "This isn't the first time someone's seen this," Riven said. "And if I had to guess, it won't be the last." Juna's mind raced. If this signal had been received before, why hadn't anyone done anything about it? Why was it buried? That's when she remembered Kale. Kale was a historian, specializing in ancient civilizations. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. They found him in his cluttered office, surrounded by books and artifacts. When Juna showed him the signal and the manuscript, his face turned pale. This is impossible," he said. "This language, it's not from Earth. It's from a civilization that existed long before humans. They were called the Velath. They were said to have mastered space travel, but they disappeared without a trace." Juna's heart pounded. What happened to them? Kale hesitated. "No one knows for sure. But there are legends, stories of a great war, a conflict that wiped them out. And if this signal is from them, it's not a greeting. It's a warning." As the words sank in, Juna realized the gravity of what they had uncovered. This wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was a revelation. One that NASA, or someone else, had tried to bury. And now, it was in their hands, the hidden facility. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of golden sand under the relentless sun. Sarah adjusted her sunglasses, squinting at the coordinates on her GPS. The location Torin had given her was supposed to be here, but all she could see was barren wasteland. "You sure this is the right place?" she asked, turning to Torin. The former NASA scientist nodded, his face grim. "It's here. They just didn't want anyone to find it." Sarah had spent weeks tracking down Torin. He had been one of the lead scientists on a classified project decades ago, but he had vanished after the project was abruptly shut down. When she finally found him, living under a fake name in a small town, he had been reluctant to talk. But something in her persistence, or maybe her threats to expose him, had convinced him to share what he knew. "This facility," she said. "What's inside?" Torin hesitated. Things NASA didn't want the world to know about. Things they couldn't explain. Before she could press further, a low rumble filled the air. Sarah turned to see a beat-up Jeep approaching, kicking up a cloud of dust. Behind the wheel was a man with a scruffy beard and a cocky grin. "That's Dax," Torin said. "He's the only one who can get us inside." Dax stepped out of the Jeep, his eyes scanning the group. "So, you're the ones crazy enough to go poking around NASA's dirty laundry," he said, his tone laced with amusement. "Hope you're ready for what's in there." "What's in there?" Sarah asked. Dax's grin faded. "Nothing good." The facility was hidden beneath the sand, its entrance concealed by a series of retractable panels. Dax led them to a hidden control panel, typing in a code that made the ground shudder and shift. A massive door slid open, revealing a dark tunnel leading underground. The air inside was cold and stale, the walls lined with flickering fluorescent lights. As they descended, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being washed. "This place was built in the 60s, Torin explained as they walked. "After the Roswell incident, the government wanted a secure location to study. Well, you'll see." They reached a large chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts. Metallic fragments, glowing crystals, and devices that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. But what caught Sarah's attention was the massive object in the center of the room. It was a spacecraft, or at least what was left of one. The craft was partially buried in the ground, its surface scorched and cracked. It didn't look like anything humans could have built. "This is what they found," Torin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A crashed alien ship. They'd been studying it for decades, trying to reverse engineer the technology. But they never could figure out how it worked." Sarah stepped closer, her heart racing. "And the crew? What happened to them?" Torin's face darkened. There were no bodies, just something else. He led them to a nearby console, pulling up a series of files on the screen. The documents detailed NASA's attempts to study the ship, but there were gaps, whole sections redacted or missing. "They tried to activate it," Torin said. "They thought they could control it, but they were wrong." "What happened?" Dax asked, his usual bravado gone. Torin hesitated. "Something woke up, something that wasn't supposed to. It got out. Killed half the staff before they could contain it. They sealed off this facility and buried the records. But I always knew it wasn't over." Sarah's mind raced. If NASA had been hiding something this big, what else were they keeping secret? "We need to see the rest of this place," she said. Torin nodded, leading them deeper into the facility. The further they went, the more unsettling it became. The walls were lined with containment units, most of them empty. But one, near the end of the hall, was different. The glass was cracked, and the inside was covered in a strange black substance. It looked like tar, but it seemed to move, shifting and pulsating as if alive. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Torin didn't answer. Instead, he pulled up another file on the console. It was a video, dated from the 70s. The footage showed a group of scientists working in the facility. They were examining the black substance, which had been contained in a sealed chamber. But something went wrong. The substance began to spread, breaking through the glass and engulfing everything in its path. The scientists screamed as it consumed them, their bodies dissolving into nothing. The video cut to static. "They called it the Void," Torin said. "It's not alive, not in the way we understand. But it's hungry, and it's still here." As if on cue, the black substance in the containment unit began to move, oozing through the cracks in the glass. "We need to go," Dax said, his voice urgent. "Now." They turned to leave, but the door behind them slammed shut. The lights flickered, and the air grew colder. "It's too late," Torin whispered. "It knows we're here." The black substance began to spread across the floor, moving toward them with terrifying speed. Sarah's mind raced, searching for a way out. "There's another exit," Torin said, pointing to a door at the far end of the room. "But we'll have to move fast." They ran, the void closing in behind them. Dax reached the door first, slamming his hand against the control panel. It didn't budge. "It's locked," he shouted. Sarah grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher, smashing it against the panel. Sparks flew, and the door slid open just enough for them to squeeze through. They emerged into the desert night, the cold air a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness of the facility. But as they caught their breath, Sarah realized something was wrong. The void wasn't just in the facility. It was spreading, oozing out of the ground and into the open air. "We have to warn someone," she said. Torin shook his head. "No one will believe us. And even if they did, it's too late. The void is awake, and it's not going to stop." The awakening. Lyra adjusted her gloves, crouching low to examine the strange growth on the forest floor. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. A cluster of translucent tendrils, pulsing faintly with an inner light. They seemed to be growing at an alarming rate, spreading across the ground like a living carpet. "This shouldn't be possible," she muttered, pulling out a sample kit. Lyra was a biologist, specializing in rare and invasive species. She had been called to this remote forest after reports of a strange plant spreading through the area. But as she studied the growth, she realized it wasn't a plant at all. The tendrils were warm to the touch, and when she cut one, it oozed a thick, iridescent fluid. The fluid moved on its own, curling around her gloved fingers before dripping to the ground. "What are you?" she whispered. A rustling sound behind her made her turn. A man stepped out of the trees, his face weathered and his eyes sharp. He carried a rifle slung over his shoulder, and his movements were deliberate, like someone who had spent years in the wild. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Lyra stood, holding up her hands. "I'm a biologist. I was sent to investigate the growth." The man's eyes narrowed. "This isn't something you can study. It's dangerous." "Who are you?" she asked. "Orin," he said. "I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen what that thing can do." Lyra glanced back at the tendrils, which had already grown several inches since she arrived. "What is it?" Orin hesitated. "It's not from here. It came down in a meteorite a few weeks ago. At first, it was just a small patch. But it's been spreading. And it's not just growing. It's changing." Before Lyra could respond, a voice called out from the trees. "Hey, over here." A man emerged, his face flushed and his clothes disheveled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, and his eyes were wild with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, holding up a strange metallic object. "I found it near the edge of the growth. It's not human." Lyra took the object, turning it over in her hands. It was smooth and cold, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. It looked like a piece of technology, but it was unlike anything she had ever seen. "Who are you?" she asked. "Zane," the man said. "I've been tracking this thing for weeks. It's not just a plant. It's a life form. And it's connected to something bigger." Orin frowned. "Bigger how?" Zane's eyes gleamed. "Aliens. This thing is part of an alien organism. And it's not just growing. It's waking up." Lyra's mind raced. If Zane was right, this wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was a potential first contact. But the way the tendrils moved, the way they seemed to react to her presence, it made her uneasy. "We need to contain this," she said. "If it's spreading, it could be a threat." Orin shook his head. "It's too late for that. It's already in the trees, in the soil, in the water. You can't stop it." As if to prove his point, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The tendrils pulsed brighter, and a low hum filled the air. Lyra stumbled back as the growth began to shift, rising from the ground like a living wave. "We need to go," Orin said, grabbing her arm. But before they could move, the tendrils surged forward, wrapping around Lyra's legs. She screamed, trying to pull free, but the tendrils were impossibly strong. They dragged her toward the center of the grove, where the ground had opened up into a deep, glowing pit. Zane grabbed a nearby branch, swinging it at the tendrils. "Hold on." Orin fired his rifle, the shots tearing through the tendrils but doing little to slow them. Lyra's mind raced as she was pulled closer to the pit. She could see something moving inside, a massive, pulsating mass of light and shadow. "It's alive," she shouted. "It's waking up." Zane and Orin managed to cut her free, dragging her away from the pit. But the growth was spreading faster now, the tendrils reaching for them like hungry fingers. "We need to get out of here," Orin said, his voice urgent. They ran through the forest, the tendrils close behind. The air grew thicker, the hum louder. Lyra's heart pounded as she realized the truth. This wasn't just an organism. It was a signal, a beacon, and it was calling something. They reached the edge of the forest, collapsing onto the dirt road where Lyra's truck was parked. But as they caught their breath, they realized the growth had followed them. The tendrils were spreading into the open, reaching for the road. "We have to warn someone," Lyra said. Zane shook his head. "No one will believe us, but I know someone who might be able to help." "Who?" Orin asked. Zane's eyes were grim. "Someone who knows about aliens. Someone who's been waiting for this." As they drove away, Lyra glanced back at the forest. The growth was glowing brighter now, the hum growing into a deafening roar. Something was coming. The final warning. Nera stared at the stars through the window of her small cabin, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Retirement hadn't been easy. After decades of exploring the cosmos, being grounded felt like a prison. But tonight, something was different. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. The caller ID showed an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Nara," a voice said, urgent and breathless. "It's Kov. We need to talk." Kov. The name brought back memories. He was a hacker, a rogue who had crossed paths with NASA more than once. Nara had met him during a security breach years ago, and while she didn't trust him, she respected his skills. "What do you want?" she asked. "I found something," Kov said. "Something big, and you're the only one who can help me make sense of it." Nara sighed. "Kov, if this is another one of your cons." "It's not," he interrupted. "It's about the signal, the one NASA tried to bury." Her heart skipped a beat. "What signal?" "I'll explain when you get here," Kov said. "But hurry. We're running out of time." He sent her an address, and despite her better judgment, Nara grabbed her coat and headed out. The address led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, Kov was surrounded by monitors, each displaying streams of data and images. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "What's going on?" Nara asked. Kov didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up a file on one of the monitors. It was a video feed from a satellite, showing a massive object in deep space. "This," he said, "is what NASA didn't want anyone to see." Nara's breath caught. The object was enormous, its surface covered in intricate patterns that glowed faintly. It looked like a spacecraft, but it was unlike anything humans could have built. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Kov shook his head. "I don't know, but it's been there for months, just sitting in orbit. NASA's been monitoring it, but they haven't told anyone. And now, it's moving." He pulled up another feed, showing the object slowly shifting its position. As it moved, a series of lights on its surface began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern. "It's sending a signal," Kov said. "And it's not alone." He pulled up a map of the globe, showing multiple points where strange activity had been reported. A forest overtaken by glowing tendrils, a desert facility leaking the strange black substance, and now this. "It's all connected," Kov said. "The signal, the growth, the void. It's all part of the same thing. And it's not just a warning. It's a countdown. Nara's mind raced. If Kov was right, this wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was a global threat. We need to tell someone, she said. Kov shook his head. No one will believe us. Not without proof. And even if they did, it's too late to stop it. Then what do we do? Nara asked. Kov hesitated. There's one person who might be able to help. Someone who knows more about this than anyone else. Who? Erin, Kov said. A military strategist. She's been studying extraterrestrial threats for years. If anyone can figure out how to handle this, it's her. Nara nodded. Call her. Erin arrived within hours, her sharp eyes scanning the data with a practiced ease. She listened as Kov and Nara explained everything, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. You're right, she said finally. This is a threat. But it's not just an invasion. It's a reclamation. What do you mean? Nara asked. Erin pulled up an image of the ancient manuscript Kov had found in NASA's archives. The symbols matched the patterns on the spacecraft. This isn't the first time they've been here, Erin said. The Velath, the ancient civilization that disappeared. They weren't wiped out. They left. And now, they're coming back to reclaim what's theirs. What's theirs? Kov asked. Earth, Erin said. Or at least, the technology they left behind. The growth, the void, the signal, it's all part of their plan. They're waking up their old systems, preparing for their return. Nara's heart sank. Can we stop them? Erin hesitated. Maybe, but it won't be easy, and it won't be clean. What do you mean? Kov asked. Erin's eyes were grim. We have two options. We can try to fight them, but we'll be outmatched. Or we can try to negotiate, but we have no idea what they want. There's a third option, Nara said. We warn everyone. We tell the world the truth. Kov and Erin exchanged a look. It'll cause panic, Kov said. It's better than being caught off guard, Nara replied. Erin nodded. She's right. We have to tell them. But we need to be careful. If we're wrong, we'll look like fools. If we're right, well, we'll have a lot more to worry about. As they prepared to go public, Nara couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The stars outside seemed colder now, the sky darker. Something was coming. And the world wasn't ready.